I'm here with Molly Crabapple, a journalist, a artist, and an influence to many people in the world. Molly, it's a pleasure being able to speak with you today, and I thank you.
Thank you so much for talking with me.
Of course. So, I would like to observe the space in which we are in currently, and I noticed you are sitting within a fairly luxurious chair. Could you tell me a bit about it?
Sure. So this chair belonged to my great grandmother, Rose. I think one of the benefits of living in a place for a really long time, that your family lived in for a really long time, is you get to inherit all of the cool things that were like cheap when they were bought in the 1920s that now are super luxurious, and this chair is definitely one of them.
Yes.
And this chair is also the focus of an art project that I did called the Chair Series, where I drew dozens of my friends and then also just New Yorkers I admired sitting in this chair, either like naked or wearing their finest burlesque finery. And it was this like real attempt just to do something that was about like life and beauty, and something that was also against technology, because I wasn't using any photo reference. Even the music I was listening to was like my old vinyl. It was just me, them, my paints, my pastels, some pieces of scrap cardboard, and this chair.
I see. So, do you remember the first time you sat in this chair?
Oh, what was the first time? So I have to give a backstory for this to
Please.
answer it adequately. My great grandfather was a painter. He taught my mother how to paint. She taught me how to paint. There's actually, I don't know if it's probably out of the frame, but if it was in the frame, there's one of his paintings in that corner.
Yes.
And when I was a kid, I would go to his house. He had, of course, had passed, so it was my great aunt Ida's house. And it was this like ramshackle old place in Gravesend with a crazy garden full of sunflowers, and all of his sculptures, his paints were still there. His like turpentine was still kind of evaporated on his palette. A big picture window, all of his old like Yiddish books, and this chair. And I have these like very vivid sense memories of being, I don't know, 7, 6, like really tiny, like my feet didn't touch the floor, and I'm like sitting in this chair reading some books.
I can believe that. You know, this leads me to my next question, which would be, would you say you have a photographic memory?
I think my boyfriend would say that I have a photographic memory for things that I like and no memory for things that I don't. So I think you could say that I have a photographic memory for when I read a Victor Surge novel and want to do a quote, but I have magically no memory for when the dishes need to be washed and when the garbage needs to be taken out.
I could say the same.
Yes,
I could definitely say the same. So you capture such moments throughout your time in journalism. You have taken imagery and drawn them at Guantánamo Bay. You were fairly active in Occupy Wall Street. I would like to ask, what is the process that you go through when capturing such a moment in space and time, and then or I should say, how do you capture a moment and then actually put your pen to paper or a pencil to a pad afterwards and make sure that what you're capturing or seeing in the moment is as accurate as what you're depicting on paper?
I think I actually got a lot of my skills on this in a place that might seem unlikely. When I was 24, I was an artist at the Box, which at the time was like the coolest, most depraved, most fucked up, most fancy ass nightclub in the city. Now it's a place that like Jersey guys go, but at the time it was the tops. And it was a place where all of these performers that I knew from the burlesque world, like these, fire eaters, these strippers, these acrobats, were performing on stage while the worst scumbags in the world were in the audience. The people who wrecked our economy were there spending $10,000 a night on champagne. And it was my job to sit in the corner of the stage with my sketch pad and document that. and everyone is jostling me, right? They're like spilling drinks on me. The girls are doing backflips in front of me, and all I'm doing is I'm just like staring, and I'm trying to get it right. I'm trying to draw fast. I'm trying to get that angle. I'm trying to get the one stroke that's going to sum it up. And I think that often there's this idea that like the nightclub or the burlesque show, like the go-go platform, these are not serious spaces, and politics is a serious space. And these two things are very, very separate worlds. But it's not true at all. And the skills for observing them both are the same. So when Occupy Wall Street happened down the block from me in 2011, I started going down from the very first day to support, but also to document. And I went down with my sketch pad and I drew what I saw. I also took a lot of photos with my phone, and I'm a bad photographer. Like none of my photos will ever be published anywhere. You'd be lucky if my thumb isn't in the photo, right? Bad, terrible. But that's actually good, right? Because if I was a good photographer, then I would just post those photos,
Exactly.
right? There'd be no need. But instead, I took these bad photos that nonetheless have information that I can use, right? Like who was there, what it looks like, what the light is, what the signs are. And from those photos, I would also draw. And I think that when I'm doing journalism, it's a combination of the two, and it kind of depends on the circumstance. So when I was in Guantánamo Bay, this is one of the most censored places in the world. This is a place where there's literally a military minder that is following you around, making sure that your camera isn't pointing anywhere that they don't want. So when I was there, I used my sketch pad to quite literally draw around that censorship. For instance, one way that they avoid people taking photos there is they say you can't have any human faces. Now imagine a crowded room, you can't have any faces. Where's your camera going to go, right? It's going to go at the floor. You're not going to get anything. But what I did was I drew these kind of like, they're not smiley faces exactly. They're like these blank masks where the faces would go. And that was my way of showing these soldiers that are quite literally like participating in a torture camp as the cogs in this horrific machine that they were.
Right.
And it was the same. For 5 minutes, they took me to draw the detainees, or to see the detainees, not to draw them. And these are like older men who have been locked up for no fucking reason. No proof that they did anything, no charges usually. Just people who were just kidnapped. And there's, again, a military minder over my shoulder, and I'm just trying to, draw these guys. And I couldn't draw their faces. They wouldn't let me. So I drew these like violent black marks over it to show the way that this torture camp, but also that this torture camp effaced them, and tried to block out even their identities from the outside world.
So would you say that there's a place in which you combat the ambiguity of what is happening within these spaces in your drawings?
Exactly. Like there's another way I could have drawn that, right? I could have just drawn backs of people's heads and made it seem like, oh, it's just a coincidence. But it's like, no, I want to show that the censorship is there. I want to show that this is a violent space that doesn't want the truth of itself revealed. And so I drew the censorship into it.
I see. I understand that. That's very powerful.
Thank you.
I think to be able to capture such a moment and then also make it palatable for consumers is something, or even just the public, not even just consumers themselves, is something that is difficult. So how would you say, after capturing these moments, not being able to photograph, having to actually burn these images into your own memory, would you decompress as a journalist to another journalist? I must know, because I understand that when you go to events, demonstrations of different types, there's lots of noise. There's events that are happening that sometimes you will never ever forget, the things that you're witnessing and seeing. How would you say you decompress?
Oh man, I can't I can't say that I have like super healthy strategies for this, and I'm just gonna be dead up. When I started doing this, I would just like get shit-faced drunk a lot with my friends. I would just get so fucking drunk, and we'd be bullshitting till like 5 a.m. And I think that there's a sort of certain truth-telling you get when you're like exceedingly drunk. Smoking a million cigarettes, you just smoke a bunch of weed, you know. I mean, I'm just gonna be real, you know. It's like, so I think that at the start, there was a lot of just like drinking yourself to truth at 4 a.m. Let's say. Later, as I've gotten older, this will sound strange, but in my place that we live now, we have a community garden across the street. And I was never like into gardening because I didn't, you know, my mom lived in an apartment since I was 7. I just didn't have like, you know, access, right? And most of the places that I lived before, you know, those community gardens in a lot of New York, they're like the fiefdoms of old ladies. And like, you're not fucking getting a finger in there. Like those chicks are like, the knives are out, you know? But this one is not like that. This one, it is a fiefdom of old ladies, but it's also, they're nice and they let you plant stuff too.
Amazing.
And so there's something about like, I don't know, sticking seeds into the earth and then stuff coming out. And I mean, it's magic, right? Like, this is going to sound so daft to all of your viewers who have grown up in the country, but they're just going to forgive me. Maybe they'll find this charming. But it's like, how fucking crazy is it that there's literally this fucking living beings that convert light into something that humans can turn into life? Like, how fucking crazy is that, right?
I can agree.
And so, for me, like, there's something about like planting stuff and then like sharing that stuff with like people in my building. Like, I always pick lots of tomatoes during the summer because we have so many tomato plants, and I give them to all the old ladies in the building here. And I don't know, like there's something to me that's like so life-giving about that. Like one of my favorite writers, Victor Serge, who was a Russian revolutionary who sided with Trotsky, so he got his ass kicked out of Russia. Then, you know, the Nazis take over Europe. He has to flee to Mexico, right? His whole life is him like living underground, you know, fighting in like underground militias, you know, doing crazy shit, right? And he wrote also these beautiful books. And one of the things that he talks about is that even in the middle of all of the fucking death and horror of the 20th century, the triumph of life, even in the form of like plants and trees growing from the ground, this like triumphant, stubborn persistence of life. And I think getting my hands in the dirt helps remind me of that.
That's amazing. That sounds like there's a ton of growth through progression in times of journalism. Would you say that you were still proactively documenting situations that are happening in today's current day and age?
I temporarily took a break from journalism because I got a fellowship at the New York Public Library where literally I was sitting in this amazing little mahogany room with all of my books, writing for like 10 hours a day. And I just couldn't, you know, I had no room in my head. But the last piece that I did was I was in Palestine. I was in the West Bank in June 2023, which of course like makes like fucking everything that's happened since like shattered me, obviously. And but I was just there like kind of documenting, you know, daily life under the occupation. And I'd been to Palestine before. I'd been to Gaza actually in 2015. You know, I met the most remarkable, like just tough, resilient people who are now, you know, living under a genocide. But I hadn't spent time in the West Bank, just hanging out with friends. And so I just wanted to document like how people lived, like the really cool hipster bar in Ramallah, like where like the like super cute feminist girls are smoking lots of cigarettes, or my friend Mariam Barghouti, how she would like look so graceful like a Degas ballerina in the morning when she's like making me coffee. Or there was this one moment, it was at this fucking checkpoint between when you go from Ramallah to Jerusalem, there's this checkpoint. It's like almost like an airport terminal. It's called a Kalandia checkpoint. And in this checkpoint, there are these like, the Palestinians are like forced to line up in front of these, they're like subway turnstiles, you know, the tall subway turnstiles, right? And then there's these like teenage army girls whose job it is they press a button and the turnstile goes.
Okay.
But these girls, because they're teenagers, are just sitting around on TikTok. They're literally on TikTok. They're taking selfies. They don't give a shit, right? So this lion is there, and it's just like waiting and waiting and waiting for fucking hours. Sorry, I'm so foul-mouthed. And these girls are taking photos of themselves and not doing anything. And then sometimes they press the button, and then sometimes it's not long enough, and the people are trapped in the turnstile. And it's just this like very literal manifestation of the apartheid that's there, right? Mm-hmm. And so I saw this moment where there was this beautiful young Palestinian woman. She was hijabi woman, and she had like these really Hollywood-looking black shades, you know, like something from the 1950s, golden age, and this beautiful, like perfect, like just fine red lipstick, right? And her shades were a little bit down over her nose, so she had like also like just gorgeous makeup. Like could have been a makeup artist, this chick, and very elegant. And the turnstile just shut right in front of her, and she just like sort of looked over the top of her things, like what the fuck, you know, with this little smirk on her face. And to me, like that was like the defiance of Palestinians, right? Like all of this fucking architecture meant to dehumanize them, until she's like, really?
I see.
And I kind of took a sneaky iPhone photo of her. I didn't want her to think I was a creep, you know, but I just had to get that moment. And it's actually, maybe I'll show you it when we...
I would love to see it.
And that's, when you were talking about how I get like something that summarizes a moment in time, a lot of it's just like that. It's just like looking and trying to find those seconds and minutes and hours in daily life that summarize something much bigger.
I completely agree with that. I couldn't agree with that more. Honestly, that's a great response. It's very touching, honestly. I have a question that actually deals with the aspect of technology, like you mentioned. So, during times of worldwide uprising, journalism is needed as a form of documentation. Understanding that propaganda and disinformation have already existed within society, there is now a new spreading of misinformation that has rapidly increased due to generative AI. What are your thoughts on activism that takes place in a contemporary hyper-socialist age of social media, enabling users a sense of self?
I mean, no, this is a really good question, because obviously, like, as soon as people could speak, people started lying, right? Mm-hmm. Disinformation is as old as humans are. Exactly. It's like some caveman. He's just like, yeah, that guy, he didn't destroy that mammoth. I did, you know?
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, as soon as people existed, they're bullshitting, right? But basically what generative AI does is it turns it into hyper overdrive, right? It churns out more bullshit than any human could ever possibly do. Like, we don't have enough vocal cords to churn out the bullshit that AI does, right?
True.
It's literally the bullshit engine. And at the same time, even before AI, social media platforms very often are like training you, like Pavlov trains a dog, right? And they all incentivize for their own things. Like Twitter incentivizes for conflict. Yeah. Instagram incentivizes you to show your face. Yeah. TikTok incentivizes you to do stupid little dances and make trite points, right? They all incentivize things that are always bad. And yet they've also been like these crucial tools, especially for people who are systematically shut out of legacy media. I mean, when I think about, you know, the George Floyd uprising in 2020, and I think about how many fucking, like 150 years, black people are like, cops are murdering us, and white people are like, no. And then finally, thanks to citizens journalists, this truth becomes unavoidable for white people to see. And I think the same thing is happening with Palestine. Right. So it's this very dual thing. However, I truly believe that for activism to last, it cannot just be digital. It has to be something that's built in between people, and built in between people who like know each other for a long time, and who trust each other, and who have each other's backs. It has to be something, you know, that's done face to face, that's done with knocking on doors, that's, you know, done in the streets, but that's also done with networks of care and solidarity. And I think that technology can never replicate those deep, like, human connections that can only be built between us, like, face to face.
I can agree with that. I think something that's very interesting that you brought up is the fact of being able to have in-person conversations. You were on tour, or not on tour, but you went around with Bernie Sanders and also worked as a canvasser. Can you speak to me a bit about that? As previously, I have actually also canvassed more throughout the time of COVID, so spreading information and awareness for people throughout COVID to make sure that they were able to obtain the things that they needed to stay safe within the time. Can you tell me a bit more about social interaction between people, individually and I guess on the grand scheme of a larger sense?
Oh yes. So I just want to start out with like a lot of artists, I'm a twitchy weirdo. I was not good at speaking to people. I actually think a lot of my drawing was a way to compensate for how bad I was at speaking to people when I was young. Like I'd always be crushing on these pretty girls, and instead of like talking to them and being their friend, I'd be like, here's a drawing I did of you, you know, as a way of being their friends. But in terms of canvassing, so I also canvassed during COVID. Like I would give, or not so much canvassing, but I would give, I'd bring food to old people, you know, living in like the NYCHA buildings.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure we did like a lot of the same stuff. That's awesome.
That is great.
But with canvassing, it's interesting because you meet really, really different people. Like, so my father's Puerto Rican, and like my dad's family are like very working class New York Puerto Ricans. Crabapple is obviously not my birth name. It's, you know, there are not famous Puerto Rican crabapples. But so when I was canvassing in NYCHA for Bernie, like a lot of the people I was talking to, like they had the same fucking last name as me, and like they were like my dad's family, you know. And I was finally getting my Spanish decent enough to do this.
Yeah.
And it was really cool, and it was just, I don't know, it was something really special. And also they loved Bernie, especially people in unions too. And then also I canvassed in Dearborn, which is really I think it's the largest Muslim city in America, and it was totally like different both geographically, like people live in nice houses in Dearborn, you know, not little apartments like here, but also, you know, it was a lot of, you know, Muslim people who literally had family and mosque WhatsApp groups that were turning people out for Bernie. And because it was a get out the vote thing, it was different because I was speaking to people who were already supporters. And I don't know, it's like you put on a little role, right? When you're canvassing, you're not like Molly or Camara, you're representing something greater from yourself and greater than yourself. And in some ways that gives you permission to impose on people, to knock on their doors, to ask them to do something.
Right. Well, honestly, Molly, I would say thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. My delight.
There's obviously so much more that I could ask, but as we know, the time has come. So it's a pleasure being able to speak with you, and thank you.
Thank you so much.